Imagine waking up in your own home, the place that's supposed to feel safe. But the moment your eyes adjust to the dark, you know something is wrong. You see a shadow, but it doesn't move when you do. You hear breathing, but it isn't yours. The floorboards creak under a weight that shouldn't exist. And from the hallway, someone calls your name in your own voice. Every instinct tells you to run, but you already know there's nowhere to go. Because whatever this is, it's been here all along, watching, waiting, feeding on your fear. And for one family, this wasn't a nightmare. It was their reality. By the late 1970s, the Smurl home had become a battlefield. What had once been a place of safety now throbbed with malevolence. Shadows twisted unnaturally in the corners. Floorboards groaned under invisible weight, and even the faintest sound made the family's hearts pound in terror. One quiet evening, just after sunset, Janet was folding laundry when a sudden thunderous bang erupted from the kitchen. The sound was so violent it rattled the windows and sent her heart leaping into her throat. For a moment, she froze. Then, driven by fear and instinct, she ran toward the noise. But the moment she stepped in, the kitchen exploded into chaos. Cupboard doors slammed open and shut, each crash louder than the last. Plates flew from the shelves, spinning through the air before shattering on the floor. Drawers rattled violently, one after the other, as if unseen hands were testing their strength. Every nerve in Janet's body screamed her to run, but some dark, unshakable force rooted her to the spot, forcing her to watch the house come alive with fury. Hearing the noise, Jack ran toward the kitchen. But before he could reach Janet, a chair suddenly slid across the floor, scraping loudly before crashing into the wall. There was no wind, no tremor, no logical explanation, only the terrifying sense that something invisible was standing right behind him. In the days that followed, the evidence of that presence became impossible to deny. Deep scratches appeared on walls overnight, as if carved by claws. Furniture splintered without reason, and a thick, foul, sulfuric stench clung to every corner of the home. The Smurls could feel it now. Whatever was in their home had only just begun. A few weeks after the first violent outbursts, Jack tried to take a nap, hoping to rest his exhausted body. But the moment he closed his eyes, the air around him grew thick, heavy. Before he could even react, the bed seemed to vanish beneath him. His body was lifted into the air, suspended by an invisible force that pinned him helplessly in place. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The silence around him suffocated his voice before it could even leave his throat. Then, without warning, the invisible force released him, and he crashed back onto the mattress with an impact that shook through his body. And in that stillness, a horrifying realization crept over him. This wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't madness. Something was here with him. A few nights later, the attacks grew even more violent. Jack and Janet were fast asleep, exhausted from countless sleepless nights. The house was silent, but suddenly, something grabbed Janet, yanking her violently from the bed and dragging her across the floor with terrifying strength. Her screams tore through the house, echoing down the hallway as her body slid toward the doorway. Pulled by something she couldn't see or fight. Jack woke to the sound of her cries and saw Janet being dragged out of the room. Without thinking, he leapt from the bed and sprinted after her, grabbing her by the arms and pulling with everything he had. But every pull was met with resistance, like they were caught in a merciless tug-of-war, with something invisible, cold, and hungry. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the resistance vanished. Janet collapsed into Jack's arms, trembling violently, gasping for breath. And for a long moment, neither spoke. The room was quiet, but it was not empty. Something was there, and both knew it wasn't finished with them. Night after night, the Smurls found no peace. The house never truly slept. It only waited. Then, one night, long after the lights had gone out and the air had fallen still, a scream tore through the darkness. It was sharp, piercing, filled with such raw terror that it seemed to shake the walls themselves. It was Shannon, their youngest. The sound of her voice, frantic and broken, sent Jack and Janet running down the hallway before they even knew they were moving. When they reached her door, it was locked from the inside. But Shannon was too small to reach the bolt. That left only one possibility. Something else was in there with her. From the other side came the frantic pounding of tiny fists and the choked sobs of a child begging to be let out. Jack turned the handle, but it wouldn't budge. He threw his shoulder against the door again and again, but the house seemed to hold it shut, refusing to let him in. Then, with a violent crack, the wood splintered, and the door burst open into a silence so deep it felt alive. Inside, the room was a scene of chaos. Shannon was huddled in a corner, her small body trembling violently, tears cutting pale lines down her face. She wasn't hurt, but the sheer terror that gripped her left her shaking uncontrollably. Between broken sobs, she whispered that her favorite teddy bear had been ripped from her arms and hurled across the room. Her blankets were torn from the bed, tangled on the floor, and the door had slammed shut and locked itself, trapping her in total darkness, with something she couldn't see but could feel watching her. And the terror did not stop there. Janet began waking in the dead of night to a faint whisper. At first, the words were a blurred hiss, impossible to understand. But slowly, the whisper changed, twisting into clear words.
Leave.
Night after night, the same whispers returned.
Leave.
Each time accompanied by a cold that seemed to crawl into her bones.
Leave.
Terrified, she would shake Jack desperately to wake him up, but he wouldn't move. He just lay there, eyes open and empty, caught in a nightmare, that he could never escape from. Finally, Janet stopped sleeping altogether. Most nights, she sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by open books and scattered notes. She read everything she could find: stories of hauntings, possessions, old rites and prayers, anything that might tell her what they were facing. But the more she read, the clearer it became that their situation was far beyond ordinary. When Janet could not find answers in her books, she turned to faith. She went to their local church and pleaded with the priests for help. Days later, 2 of them came to her home. Carrying holy water, they walked slowly through each room, reciting prayers, sprinkling holy water, and blessing each corner of the house. For a short time, it worked. The nights grew quieter. The air felt lighter. The family dared to believe they might finally be free. But the calm didn't last. It never did. Within days, the foul smell returned. Objects began to move again. The same cold presence lingered in the hallways, stronger and angrier than before, as if mocking their attempts to drive it away. Feeling abandoned and desperate, Janet turned to a new kind of hope. She reached out to a university researcher who studied the paranormal, praying that science might explain what faith could not. He listened carefully, his expression unreadable, then handed her a single piece of paper with a name and a phone number: Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Smurls had heard of them, their work, their warnings, their encounters with things too dark to name. Calling them felt like opening a door that could never be closed. But they had no choice. When the Warrens arrived, the family felt a fragile spark of hope and a deep, unshakable fear. For the first time in months, someone truly seemed to believe them. Yet there was something in Ed and Lorraine's calm professionalism that made the danger feel even more real. Ed questioned the family carefully, searching for a cause, a mistake, or something that might explain the haunting. But there was nothing. No rituals, no games, no invitations. Meanwhile, Lorraine Warren and her psychic partner Diane Hayes began walking slowly through the Smurl home. They moved carefully, from room to room, paying close attention to every sound, every shadow, every shift in the air. The atmosphere grew heavier with each step, until they reached the master bedroom, where they stopped. The room was icy cold, and a thick, sulfur-like odor rose from the wardrobe, clinging to the air in a way that was almost suffocating. Lorraine did not need to see anything to know what was hiding there. She could feel a deeply malevolent presence, something ancient and hungry, but patient and deliberate, feeding on the fear that hung in the room. With every passing moment, she could sense it growing stronger, pulsating with a power that didn't belong in this world. After the walkthrough, Lorraine gathered the family in the living room to explain what she had discovered. There wasn't just one entity here. There were 4. The first was the restless soul of an elderly woman, lost and lingering. She moved quietly, almost unnoticed, drifting through the halls like a memory that refused to fade. She caused no harm, but her presence weighed on the family, filling rooms with sadness and unease. The second was darker, unpredictable, violent. This spirit was a young woman, consumed by rage. She was the one throwing things, making loud noises, scratching walls, and causing sudden aggressive attacks. The third was heavy, oppressive, relentless. This spirit was a man who had died in the house decades earlier. He didn't scream or fling objects in rage. Instead, his presence pressed down on the family like an invisible weight. Rooms grew unnaturally cold. Doors would creak or thrum as if brushed by unseen hands. His terror was subtle, psychological, suffocating, leaving the family tense, uneasy, and never truly alone. But the fourth was different. It was the most dangerous, the one that made the air itself shiver. This entity was a demon, intelligent, deliberate, and cruel. It created icy cold spots, filled the house with a foul sulfuric stench, moved furniture with unseen force, and carried out violent attacks that left the family broken with terror. It had lain dormant for decades, waiting for a family like the Smurls to corrupt. Now, it was awake, fully aware, and growing stronger with each passing day. That was when Ed Warren spoke about the stages of demonic activity. Each stage more dangerous than the last. The first stage was infestation. This is when the presence first enters a home. The signs seem harmless at first, distant footsteps, knocking from inside the walls, or a sour, rotting smell that disappears the moment you notice it. Objects shift on their own. Whispers drift through empty rooms. And something unseen begins to test its boundaries, deciding if it can stay. If the demon is not stopped, it moves to oppression. The demon stops targeting the house and turns its focus to the people inside. The goal is to break them down. This is when people in the home may experience constant fear, bad nightmares, sudden sickness, and deep sadness. The activity becomes more aggressive, louder noises, scratches, and that constant feeling of being watched. The demon is trying to make them weak, tired, hopeless. Then comes possession, the most dangerous stage of all. Once the mind and spirit are broken, the entity moves in completely. The victim loses control of their actions. It is no longer a haunting. It is a takeover. And the final stage was death. This is the demon's ultimate goal: to consume a life completely, piece by piece, until nothing remains but an empty shell. As Ed's words filled the room, silence followed. The Smurls were already deep in oppression, and the shadow of possession hung over them, heavy and ready to strike. Time was slipping away. The terror was no longer something they could endure alone. Seeing the danger, the Warrens reached out to Father Robert F. McKenna, a priest known for confronting the darkest forces. He agreed to come, to perform an exorcism, the family's last fragile hope. What happened next would push the family to their absolute limits, as their private terror spilled into the outside world, and the haunting escalated in ways no one could have imagined. If you thought part 2 was terrifying, wait until you see part 3, where the true battle for their souls begins. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this nightmare is far from over.